that tend to stay in alignment are suffering from separation anxiety.
100%. That's a great one.
Hey, I'm Lyndsey Stevens.
I'm Jesse Yedwab.
And today we are talking about separation. So there's some various degrees of separation that we use. There's some different types. Jesse, tell us about some of those different types of separation that we have available in our toolbox.
Cool. If you don't mind, I'll just define my understanding of separation first.
Okay.
Which is simply the idea that our upper and our lower body can work not as one. They can work independently of one another. And so I can move my upper body while my lower body stays stable, right? I can separate. Those two are not always working as a unit. On top of separation, we have the ability to counter-rotate. We have the ability to rotate in one direction. We have the ability to strike a countered position or a separated position, and it gets very confusing.
Right. Yeah. So let's bring some clarity to these different terms, and I just want to start by going to what we kind of train with our level 1 instructors, or instructors who are about to go for level 1, or newer instructors who are typically teaching level 1 through 4 students. We focus a lot on alignment there and creating alignment throughout the entirety of the turn. And there's a specific reason for that. As we're trying to help our students progress and create consistency, alignment helps them find that stable, sort of consistent, basic turn, right? And then as we get a little bit more dynamic, we start to add some separation, then we can start to see more performance out of the snowboard. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think level 1 through 4, we have some of that separation anxiety, as you put it.
Right.
Stay more stacked in alignment, moving the body as a unit.
I used to get that feedback a lot as I was training. They would call them bolts.
Bolted to the...
People were like, you always ride like a robot.
Yeah.
You're always in alignment. So it took me a while to get through that separation anxiety.
Totally.
So can you tell us a little bit more about those elementary levels of starting to include some separation into a rider's snowboarding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned level 1 through 4, and that sometimes we see a high degree of separation that we try to work out of our students. We try to get them a little bit more in alignment because the separation might cause an inconsistent balance. It might cause some other issues with finishing a turn or leaving a turn open. But even in our level 1, right, we don't want to be bolts. We don't want to be a robot on top of our board. And sometimes a little bit of separation and rotation out of the shoulder can help pull my hip and can actually help my lower body make the movements it needs to turn that snowboard, let's say, from a heel side to a toe side. And so I might encourage my students, especially if they're maybe have lower levels of finesse muscle movements in their ankles, to use a little bit of separation and start that turn with their upper body so that the lower body can follow behind. But I'm definitely not going to ask them to be in a crazy separated position with their shoulders out over the snow and their board completely perpendicular to their upper body.
Right. And that example you're talking about, I sometimes think about like a plus sign. Like if we were a drone looking at the rider from above, that full separation is going to look a little bit more like a plus sign. Maybe, depending on the rider's mobility and range of motion. That would be a pretty extreme example for a person to get their body completely across their snowboard like that. But I think about started thinking about some different terms that we've used or have heard, like anticipation. That's one term that we could use to describe separation, or a type of separation, which Jesse was kind of saying with, starting the turn by moving the upper body first, right? So we're here, move the upper body first, and then the lower body and the board will follow eventually. What are some useful things you see with that type of separation, and what are some ways we could improve that?
Yeah, I think anticipatory separation is extremely useful, but is specific. And just because your upper body goes first doesn't mean you're anticipating. It might mean that you're initiating through an intense degree of upper body rotation or separation. And so I think anticipatory is really an important word in the fact that I might be moving my upper body, but I'm setting up in a position to still fire and initiate the turn with my lower body. Okay. So the way I think of anticipatory separation is my upper body is getting ready for the board to come back underneath it.
Right.
But that upper body is not forcing the board to come underneath it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I think about that and like the outcome specifically of what happens there when we're using that style of separation. Right, the upper body moves first, and we're kind of waiting for that lower body and that board to follow. It's almost like there's a delay, right? There's not this instant reaction from the snowboard that we want to make things maybe a little bit tighter, a little bit more predictable. Does it have its time and its place? Absolutely. I think it's a great training tool as we're trying to help people understand the concept of separation to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, totally. And I think anticipatory separation is using separation, like you said. Separating the upper body with an intense rotation that initiates the turn is simply rotation. It wouldn't be using separation. Although the upper body separate through that intense rotation of the upper body, I wouldn't call it separation because the intent of that separation, of that upper body acting first, is to steer the snowboard. And I think when we talk about separation, that upper body movement isn't to steer the snowboard, it is to set us up in a place that we then can steer the snowboard through our lower body, our front knee, our ankle, whatever it might be. Right. Do you agree with that?
I think I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because we're looking for lower body movements, right, to control the snowboard. And so when we're actively using separation, we're going to get a lot more lower body steering, which is going to mean less of that delay, more precise reactions from the lower body, from the snowboard.
Because lower body movements closer to the snowboard, create a quicker reaction, so less time delay, and maybe more balance. Because again, I'm setting myself up in a position to utilize lower body movements, and I'm also setting myself up for when that board is across the hill, body's down the hill, that when that board comes in alignment, I'm in a nice athletic stacked position to continue to steer that board, as opposed to staying separated through the whole turn, which might be difficult to continue steering through.
I love what you're talking about there with like the timing of when these things happen in the turn. And I go back to this plus sign analogy. You know, think about if we're a drone looking at the top of the rider ideally will be making that plus sign at the initiation of the turn. As they move into the control phase, ideally, we're going to be back in alignment, finding that reference alignment. And thinking about reference alignment, it's a moment in time. We don't want to stay there all the time, like we were talking about earlier in that like level 1 through 4 rider, and being the robot. We don't want to be the robot throughout all phases of the turn. But as we go through that one moment in time, there's like a minuscule moment of robot, and that's okay.
Totally.
And then as we come back around to the finish of the turn, we start to move back into that plus sign.
Sweet. Totally. And I think it's important to say that in AASI, we would expect to see this level of separation in a higher level of riding. Probably level 5, 6, we'd start to incorporate the separation through the turn. Whereas I think we agree that level 1 through 4, we're trying to get that stacked balance. It's okay to be a little bit more of a robot, and we might be training rotation with lower body movements as opposed to separation and lower body movements.
Yeah, at that point, consistency is really important, and what that alignment does is helps us to create some consistency. As we want to create more performance, maybe we want a smaller turn radius. Maybe we want a snappier initiation to our turn. Maybe we want to blend in some other fundamentals to get, some fun tricks and things out of the snowboard as we're going. And that's where that separation can really help us to store up some energy that we can release at specific times to get that tighter turn, to get that more intense movement, or get that more precise timing.
Cool. I think I've got a good understanding of alignment versus separation and what that might look like on a snowboard. What about counter rotation?
Right, this is such a can of worms. I love that we're opening it. Great, so if we're defining counter rotation, it's when the upper body and the lower body are moving in the opposite direction at the same time. They're actively moving against one another, right? And this is something we see in a lot of riders as they're going. And I think there's been some stipulation that like, oh, counter rotation is so bad. It's like evil. We should never use it. Mm-hmm. But every tool has its time and its place, totally. Right? In our turns, if we're doing our short radius skiddies on black terrain, we're probably going to want to use separation because it's going to be more predictable. It's going to take less energy, and it's going to give us more stability. Can you think of some times when counter rotation is going to be more applicable?
Yeah, I think about counter rotation a lot in park riding. When I'm getting onto a rail, right, my snowboard is rotating in one direction to create a board slide, and my upper body is actively rotating against it to find the fall line and store some tension so that when I get off the rail, I can bring the board back underneath that upper body and land in alignment. But also, I think of it as sometimes I finish a toe side where I want a little extra oomph and I want a quick initiation to the heel side, and I might bring in what we see in that level 3-4 rider a lot, that snappy counter rotation at the finish of a toe side turn, just to help myself get a little more power initiating into that heel side.
Right. So when I think of this counter rotation, like, I think it's a great tool if it's being used intentionally.
Totally.
If it's just the survival tactic, that's where things, we start to see more edge catches or some things like hesitation and not really being able to initiate the turn when we want to. If it's being used intentionally as a trained tool, I think it has a really great time and place.
Time and place for everything.
Right? Well, thanks for joining me on this chat today, Jesse.
Thank you.